Welcome everybody to the webinar today, Assumptions Debunked and Lessons for the Future on AI plus Salesforce. I am very honored to be joined today by Matt Lamb, who is the CTO at 10K, and Mike Leach, who is are you the CEO at iDialogue or just the main smart guy
CEO,
there?
janitor, every title in between.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, great. So these are you got three bald guys on the webinar. I didn't even know that. We didn't plan that, but
Good point.
apparently
When
it's
when I
because
have the most hair, it's saying something.
right. I've known these guys for a number of years through the Salesforce ecosystem, and as we've been sort of on our AI journey here at 10K and working with customers on their journeys, I thought it would be great to get some folks smarter than us on a webinar and really just talk about their journeys with AI and what they've learned, and hopefully help those that are interested in either getting into more of the technical capabilities of AI, or extending their existing capabilities, giving them a little bit more context and information. So we have about an hour here. We're going to basically just ask a few questions. It'll be a very conversational type of webinar. And then we'll save some time at the end for Q&A, but definitely feel free to put any questions into the Q&A along the way. And we'll do our best to get to those. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I really wanted to kind of start foundationally. I remember it was just over a year ago. The 10K leadership team was in Tampa actually at an offsite, and sort of ChatGPT was just emerging as, hey, there's like this new thing, right? It wasn't the first time that AI had sort of been around, but all of a sudden there was this like ChatGPT is now AI is here, right? And all of a sudden it was like, wow, like this is more than maybe just like a cool little toy. This could be pretty powerful. What do we do with it, right? So I'm kind of curious, either Mike or Matt, like what sort of spurred you to start learning more about, especially the generative AI? I guess we'll talk about more generative AI capabilities versus broad AI capabilities. And how did you really get started, sort of on the more technical side of that journey beyond just maybe typing some prompts into ChatGPT?
Yeah, you make a good point that generative AI in the last couple of years is this completely stark contrast from historical AI. I mean, we use the same term AI, but that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And being around some FANG startups here in Silicon Valley, I was always immersed with teams that were using AI to solve problems. I tended to be more on the business application side, a little more conservative in adopting AI. 2014 was probably my first public publishing. I launched a blog called Data Mining CRM, and it was mostly just I was trying to solve a different type of problem, which were heat maps and high density visualizations, and I needed to aggregate data to some degree, have some predictions, clustering. I was looking for some serendipity, and that's always kind of been my attraction to AI. Is that when I do a lot of coding and build apps, in the end, these apps become this kind of reflection of myself. It's only as good as I am. And AI can give you that last 15%, that serendipity, take things in a new direction if you empower it and allow it to be smarter than yourself. So fast forward several years, I have this app on the App Exchange that made an attempt to kind of fuse AI and document management. And the AI portion of it was more like linear regression, OCR, kind of what you would call historical AI. And kind of tabled, we had kind of a false start in the AI, but the document generation, content generation got some traction. So when GPT came out a couple of years ago, I was just like, wow, that's what we were looking for. It's just one of those things where, we had to just steer the ship kind of 15, 30 degrees from where we're at. And we just dropped everything and raced to GPT because they just solve so much. And actually, I give a lot of credit to like Jensen Huang and NVIDIA because that was their culmination of their 25-year journey that really made this new AI possible, and obviously OpenAI and ChatGPT.
Yeah, for me, I had being a Salesforce, long in the tooth with Salesforce, you're used to things coming out and them not working all that well, and so you don't spend a whole lot of time digging in and getting really familiar with something until it's proven itself and it's been around a couple of years. So I had been playing with the Einstein models and the predictive analytics that Einstein had for just on and off, and had never had a customer need for one or internal need for one. And then it was, Nick mentioned that meeting in Tampa. We were all sitting together and started throwing things in ChatGPT, and it really became apparent pretty quickly how different it was. And so from there, we just started brainstorming, and on my team just started experimenting with different use cases internally, and started playing with well, what if we put this kind of data in? Like, what are the tasks that we don't want to do? Like, we all hate to make release notes, right? We all hate to make QA test cases, all things that need to get done, but nobody loves to do it. And we really started using those use cases to cut our teeth with it. And then from there, moving into mostly with the UI through ChatGPT's website, and then from there moving into the API and starting to experiment with different protocols that you could run through the API.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, so when you all were getting started, you mentioned, we talked ChatGPT, right? Because I think that's definitely a household name from a generative AI perspective. But there's obviously new services and platforms and language models and everything popping up every day. Did you all like tend to focus more, like go deep on one, go broad across a few, go deep on one, and then go to the next one? Sort of what talk about like somebody who's just trying to like is overwhelmed by the possibilities, right? What was your approach there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've learned with this latest generation of AI is it's actually an operating system. It's not just a particular technology, it's a breadth of components. And by the time ChatGPT surfaced, they had already been working on the fundamentals of this OS for about 7 or 8 years. And in this, if you look at the fundamentals of an operating system, there's processing, there's memory, there's storage, there's IO retrieval, there's execution of functions. And so, I run across this today. We just launched a what we call iDialogue Academy to train really the next generation using natural language configuration. And like, do we teach a breadth of skills or a depth of skills? And if you go out on Hugging Face and pull down the latest LLM or Amazon Bedrock, you can get access to these individual large language models. And there's this a breadth. I mean, we have an explosion of LLMs. But my sense is when you're teaching that to people, there's this lowest common denominator that you can never go deeper than prompts and maybe chat type interfaces. And so I've deliberately kind of focused on OpenAI, which, the 90% of Fortune 1000 are. And so, there's a lot more depth because it kind of forces you into the halo beyond the prompts. You get into the functions, you get into embeddings, you get into vector database, and you see the whole, I think, a lot quicker within a mixture of experts. So that's another thing for people looking to get involved today. I think it's useful to differentiate that we have AI as a service, just kind of like electricity, it's delivered to your door, you pull out a credit card. And that could be like an Anthropic or a Gemini or an OpenAI. But they're not one LLM. So it's not really fair to compare pulling Meta Llama 3 off the shelf and trying to get GPT-4 functionality. Because GPT, if you ask it a math problem, it's going to route to their math LLM. If you ask it write poetry, it's going to route it to another one. So it's a mixture of experts, this MOE. And I think enterprise is landing a lot more on this MOE space, at least for the first 5 years out of the gate. Kind of like when you guys were at Aperio, we had this uphill battle to convince people to go to the cloud versus their on-premise software. And that's a little bit of this revolution that's happening with AI is, we're trying to convince people that path of least resistance is going to this AI as a service. And, I think, I also have to remind myself too that I'm an engineer by nature. I can geek out and enjoy the operating system components, but I have to put on a product hat, and our customers don't necessarily want to do that. I mean, what we're building for people and helping them get familiar and learning these models is, we've got to like develop app stores. It has to be turnkey. It needs to be high level abstract prompt configuration and immediate gratification, because this technology is capable of doing that. But I mean, it's just, we're in the build stage now of getting there. It's like 1999 of the internet. And we didn't see the Facebooks and social media until 10, 12 years later. I mean, the technology was there, but, we went through this long period of figuring out how to use it. And that's kind of what's cool with AI and GPT is that we're past the point of no return. I mean, this wave is going to hit. It's going to hit hard, but it's just out of the gate. We're just making all these mistakes and figuring out the OS pieces.
Yeah, so piling on that, Matt, like are you taking I'm going to try Prodigy, I'm going to try AOL approach, like 90s ISPs to exploring AI, or how are you looking at it?
Yeah, it's funny. I if you analogize to Salesforce, like I didn't jump around when I picked Salesforce to go all in with. I didn't jump around and try HubSpot or any of the other CRMs or marketing automation platforms at the time. So we've taken a similar. I like what Mike said around the functionality, right? Like it's easy to think of go to GPT's website and you can pass text back and forth and have a conversation with it. There is so much more that's buried under that you can get at when you start digging into the vector databases and function calling. So function calling in specific is something we've started to look into, is really how to extend what we've built with the OpenAI API and allowing it to do other things that are external to it. So if I've exposed some other API that I want OpenAI to be able to call, I can enable that with functions. Right? For us at the moment, it makes most sense to get really deep in one tool. I also think it can be really easy. I started this initiative a while back. I was like, I'm gonna stay on top of what's happening in the AI landscape, and so I started signing up for a bunch of newsletters, and it's so much information. You can't possibly stay on top of what is happening in the AI world because it's moving so fast, and it's hard to differentiate sometimes the products that are, they're out there, but they're actually built on top of ChatGPT or some other LLM that's out there versus some root LLM or collection of LLMs that's been distributed. So for us at the moment, it's GPT-4, and then we started to dip into a little bit of Claude AI. So the API is very, very similar to GPT, so we can sort of port those functions over with ease. But for now, it's GPT all the way.
Cool. Awesome. All right, Molly, what's our next question here? All right, I think this is an interesting one. So, looking back to like the early days of like exploring use ChatGPT, and just being sort of amazed at, wow, I can type in like a sentence or a question and get like something that's pretty awesome, like something that maybe I didn't expect. It's surprising. And I think especially in the early days when you've had a few early successes, whether on purpose or by accident, with the way that you've prompted these LLMs, you can start to extrapolate that into, wow, that means I should be able to do this and this and this, and it's going to allow me these amazing capabilities, right? And all I'm going to have to do is write a few lines of code or write some cool prompts. I'm curious, from each of you. Sort of what are some things that like that you've discovered that like, hey, I thought we would be able to do this really easily, but in fact, like that's not either a great use case for AI or that's really not how you should be thinking about using AI. So what are some roadblocks potentially that we can save other people from as they go down their journey with building applications around it?
Yeah, I can go. Probably the biggest mistake I made, and I actually see this broadly, is we're projecting the consumer chat GPT experience onto the enterprise. And on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most complex AI project you can take on, a conversational chat GPT experience is up there like an 8 or 9. It's a really difficult project to take on. And but we get grounded in what we see first. We see it. I tried, immediately started building conversational AI and into Salesforce, and you go deeper down the rabbit hole, and that's when you start seeing the whole operating system. You start appreciating like what OpenAI did over 7 years to get to that point. Then, as you get hands-on with prompts, I think you learn like there are some, on a scale of difficulty, some 1 and 2. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit GPT projects you can do. Instant success. You can show it to your C-level execs in a prototype. They'll immediately buy in. There's no cultural change. You're not asking your users to change their behavior and type in like, oh, summarize this account. No, you just do the account summary in the background. So we've really been digging into where we're getting our immediate traction. We've learned that lesson that, ChatGPT, while conversational, is here to stay. And we were talking earlier about we have a whole new generation that kind of like the equivalent of the TI calculator. They've been giving a tool that's going to transform the next few generations. So I'm not saying that chat, experiences should not be in the enterprise. It's just that on a scale of 1 to 10, you need to recognize if you're adopting AI, it is the most complex type of project you can implement. And there's tons and tons of low-hanging fruit. I mean, we needed some orchestration, so we built on Salesforce flows, obviously, for that. And so, and the second thing I've learned is this concept of hallucinations. This out of the gate, a lot of people like, oh, AI hallucinates, you can't trust it, it lies. And what you learn over time when you get hands-on is that the quality of the output is really just proportional to the quality of the input, or the acronym GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And so, if you approach an enterprise chatbot that's not been grounded, that doesn't have its RAG retrieval augmentation kind of figured out, and you give it 5 words, it's going to just come back with garbage pretty much universally. So I see a lot of people, whether I'm in a sales or marketing or training context, and they say, hey, AI hallucinates. And I'll ask them, okay, what have you tried doing? And you walk them through it. And eventually, you get to kind of what in academia they call multi-shot prompts. You get into grounding prompts. And it's basically you're just kind of writing an essay before anything else, before you even enter a prompt. And so with legal teams, I'm working on this with their documents. If we do any sort of, you ask a legal professional, like, write 1,000 words on every time you look at a contract or an agreement that comes across your desk, what top 10 things are you looking for? And it's things like NDAs need to be mutual NDAs, and termination agreements need to be this, and so you write that out in 1,000, 2,000 tokens, and by the time someone's typing in their 5 words, like, is this agreement in compliance? It has the benefit of all that grounding, and it gives you amazing results. I mean, that's really the secret sauce to this. I mean, it doesn't hallucinate. It only kind of goes off and hallucinates if it has to fall back to its own LLM. And, that's pulling in Wikipedia and Cypress scrolls and anything that those models could crawl. But, if you're applying this in the enterprise, the big lesson learned is don't make an assumption that AI works by itself. I mean, you have to ground it and give it some context.
Yeah, I think that's really true. We had coming from a world of Salesforce where you're used to working with relational or at least quasi-relational databases, right? Like things are idempotent. When you query the account table, you get the data you asked for back, right? Because it's sitting there in a table and it's data you can retrieve. And so one of the interesting things we've, maybe not hard assumption going into it, but a thing we've sort of found out and had to adjust to on the way on our journey for it is, you can get different results for the same inputs. So that, the specificity with which you ask things of the LLM is very important. And even, certain language choices become very important. Even different words swapped in will produce pretty different results on the back end. So you have to be careful around how how you're designing prompts to go into the process. To Mike's point, like the more specificity and the more background you can give it in the beginning is really key to getting consistent and desirable results out of it. And then, having processes to not just trust the output of it 100% of the time, right? Making sure that you're not just taking a response from GPT and putting it into a document and sending it to a customer, or putting it out live on a website for a customer to see, right? Having some sort of check and balance there with humans still in the loop, I think is a key thing that's going to continue to be a part of that process for the foreseeable future.
Right on. I have an interesting, so like as I was thinking through what you guys were talking about there, I think we could probably take this next question into a whole nother webinar. So maybe try to limit it to 30 seconds to a minute, but the importance of, or the distinction between training a model and prompting that model to get consistent results versus building a prompt model, which on a more general model to get the results that you want. What are some of maybe like the pros and cons, or the what are the considerations for that? Because obviously training a model could be expensive, very complicated. You have to have a lot of data. But is there an advantage to maybe one approach versus the other?
Well, Matt, I think used the right word, which is this immutable versus mutable data. And in the enterprise, Salesforce in particular, ERP, we're dealing with fairly mutable data. I mean, a lead status is going to go from qualified to different stages. Opportunities are changing, so it's very mutable. And yes, it would be nice to just type into a chat, tell me all leads or opportunities that meet this criteria, and that LLM is trained already. It's extracted the entire org, it's created the embeddings, it's gone through the whole training cycle. Realistically, that training cycle, even if you're a top performer, could be a 24-hour cycle. I mean, if you just are given a snapshot of data and you're going to burn that, I mean, just an LLM is basically a compiled asset if you think about it. But fortunately, this architecture has the luxury of memory, and that memory is getting larger. Matt mentioned Claude. I mean, that memory is up around 200K. Gemini is around 1 million tokens. And so we have this luxury of, we have a language model that I just approach it as, hey, as humans, we've agreed that Romance languages do this, and genders do this in language, and nouns and verbs and adjectives form this way. But in the memory, the mutable data that we can pull out of real time in like milliseconds, and we can say, but here's the context of how I want you to talk. And so to me, I think that's the difference between training versus RAG, which is this retrieval augmented generation, and the balance of the two.
That's a good perspective on it, Matt Lamb. You have something you want to add?
I don't know, not too much. I would say that, to your question, like, what's the trade-off and benefit? Mike mentioned, right? Like training your own model can be extremely intensive and expensive, right? You've got to go off and have somewhere to do that. You've got to amass all the training data to do that. I would pressure test anyone who says we need to go train our own model model if you haven't already tried to put those things through one of the publicly available LLMs. And you've tried different avenues to prompt engineering, and you've tried different avenues to seed that public LLM with additional data to work from. That would be my first stop on this path for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's from my perspective, a bit of a change just really over the last year as these new models have come to light that allow a bigger context model, right? Sort of almost like in the beginning when the context windows were so small, you almost you couldn't give it all that context, right? In one prompt. Like you said, Mike, it's hard to create a chat bot basically when the limitation of your context is super small. Certainly that gets still challenging, but as the context window gets bigger, that becomes a little bit easier. And I think from my perspective, that's sort of one of the bigger changes that I've seen in the last year around the perspective of, okay, I've got to train a model because my context window is so small, I can't give it that much. And I've got to, make sure that it's focused on this set of data versus now context windows can almost, in some cases where you don't have a complex training need, really supersede the need to train a model. Right?
Yeah, isn't that amazing that the context window was like 4K 2 years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, it really speaks to this is faster than Moore's law. I mean, this is going 10x every 6 months. It's just amazing. I saw a slide of what they're training up at Microsoft for GPT-5. And so they spent $100 million to train GPT-4. They're at $1.2 billion training GPT-5. And it's just amazing.
Okay, Molly, what are we on to next? The most interesting thing you've discovered about using AI. I think any both like any funny stories to share about things you may have accidentally uncovered, or any things that you maybe stumbled upon, or capabilities that you're like, I don't think this is going to work, but wow, look what that did.
This is a silly one, but I remember us sitting around in Tampa and we figured out that you could ask it to reply like a pirate. And that proved 15 minutes worth of fun for everybody, right? I do think that is interesting, and the role you can have it take on. We've been playing a lot with that on a recent project in how to post announcements about things internally. And I don't know if this is the most interesting thing I found about it, but it has been an interesting way to process the results. So the results are the same roughly, but you can give it lots of different inputs around the context and the persona you want it to take on, right? Write this as if you are a little bit excited about it versus write this as if you're really excited about it, or this is a life-changing experience, and you get wildly different outcomes and tones that come out of it. So I think that's been something we've been playing with recently. It's not super groundbreaking, like I said, but it has been something. If you are already playing with GPT and you've got the API access, make sure you're also alternating in different personas there, because they can have a real impact on what you get back from it.
Yeah, I'd say the most interesting thing for me, well, one, the fact that AI is an operating system, that's an insightful light bulb moment that, I hope everyone kind of goes through that, because I think from a career perspective too, it just opens your eyes as to we're on a 20-year journey with this. It's not a passing fad. But probably the most interesting thing I'm playing with lately is JSON mode. JSON's an acronym for JavaScript Object Notation. And the first pass of our document parser was really inefficient. It's like you upload a PDF and there's a record trigger flow, and then you want to ask 20 questions on this document. This is all asynchronous, by the way. Upload could be at 3 a.m. So no user is suffering the performance. But we'd make 10 different call outs, 10 different GPT call outs, get the completion, and we'd go back and we would update a field on a Salesforce record. And then you get your bill at the end of the month and you're like, okay, how can I bring this down? So talk about making errors. I mean, when you get hands-on with the AI, with the API, you start, you make some financial token-based errors. So With JSON, we make one query and we structure the prompt to say, give me the results back in a JSON payload. It's a series of key value pairs where the key is a field name. There's lots of double underscore C type of values and the value for each one. And we have this parenthetical syntax to extract key information. Yeah, that's just been amazing because we've 10x, our GPT bill is now 10% less than it was. And we've been able to kind of with our customers pass on that savings and none of our customers have triggered the usage-based billing or consumption yet. But the other thing to kind of parlay on JSON is that that's also the language for REST APIs, and we just have this massive investment in REST APIs all over the planet. And I think when we get to agents who are going to act on behalf of us, this is going to be lots of small JSON payloads going back and forth. Like, hey, I want to go on vacation where it's sunny and this kind of plane. And so the way that these agents will represent or do work on behalf of us is going to be talking to REST APIs through these JSON payloads.
We'll talk about that a little bit. What's just get nerdy a little bit on that for a second. Like, what's the advantage to doing that, and what's the implication to that reducing the bill by 90%?
If you want me to screen share for 30 seconds, I kind of have one teed up here. It's up to you. But I mean, pictures tell 1,000 words. Well, it's not doing the sharing, but so yeah, there's the compression, first of all. So the payloads, if you find yourself in a situation where, like, one thing a lot of our customers like to do is set up a nightly scheduled flow. It wakes up at 2 a.m., pulls in a subset of documents, and then it wants to do GPT enrichment on all of them. I was talking earlier about the user experience. People want to log into Salesforce and have that account summary already there. They don't want to have to pull it. So we have this push versus, we prefer to do a push over a pull. We push a GPT summary. We push a suggested email on the lead record. So we do all this in batch. But yeah, it's also interesting in that, developer skills aren't going away because JSON's kind of the new lingua franca. OpenAI has even acknowledged it. I mean, if you go into their documentation, they talk about this is JSON mode. And I have some insight into how some Wall Street companies are operating. Like, they're doing all their stuff in batch at night, risk management assessment. There's no, real conversational UI. And yeah, I mean, the capstone on this, if you go back to after Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet, he was like, what do I do next? And so he came up with the semantic web. So I actually think from a sci-fi perspective, this technology has the potential to be the semantic web because, the agents love XML. It's a self-describing language. They love JSON. They're great at natural language, and that will always be there. But to just talk into your phone and tell an agent to do this, it's going to translate it into a format that it can use programmatically with existing APIs. And I think that JSON XML on the wire is a pretty powerful thing for GPT.
Yeah, I suspect that the more that we can get, interact with to and fro with AI systems in JSON, the easier it's going to be to steer those ins and outs into the enterprise, right? We've spent years and years and years orchestrating databases and systems together in the enterprise with JSON and hopefully less and less XML over the years. But having to build, we want to use that same backbone that's already been built inside the enterprise. We want to plug into that, and the easiest path forward with that is getting JSON responses from everything. And if you look at a lot of the, GPT is already leading that forward with like the functions capability inside of GPT is all really JSON based and how you're feeding that in. So, yeah.
I will say in XML's defense.
Oh no.
If I may. So I have this side project, right? Using the Salesforce metadata API, just pull down tons of XML, and I throw it all into a RAG, basically a vector database. And there's no additional step because XML is self-describing. There's no fine tuning because XML basically is the format of what would be a fine tuning file format. So I have to say, XML's day might be coming back.
Oh no, we've been here too long. If XML's going to come back around.
Well, humans don't have to look at it or write
That's
XSLT,
fair.
but the machines love it. Yeah.
There you go.
Next webinar,
Yeah. Next
XML
webinar.
versus JSON.
The XML
Okay.
renaissance.
Molly, what's up next? All right, so let's get into some sort of like, how is this going to change our worlds as Salesforce consultants? That's the audience for this webinar here. We've got a lot of experienced Salesforce folks here, some more technically leaning than others. I think DevOps has always been thought of maybe as a more technical part of a Salesforce consultant or admin or developer's job. However, I do believe, especially with the advent of a lot of the tools that have come to market in the last couple of years, that sort of everybody has a hand in DevOps. And it's a really important part of how we do work with Salesforce going forward, especially in more complex environments. So, when we talk about AI, using AI to help us as Salesforce consultants, help our customers, how do we avoid some of the Salesforce DevOps mistakes of the past? And I think, Mike, this was really something that you had brought up. I'm kind of curious, what were the mistakes you're trying to avoid, and where do you think AI plays a role to help?
Yeah. I mean, experience and fail is a great teacher, right? It's I think in the initial excitement of GPT and racing out and deploy it, there was not a lot of DevOps. There was no TDD, there's no test-driven development. Deployment sometimes is an afterthought. And I come from an extreme programming background, some of these agile methodologies, and you can justify that to a degree as what's called a spike. But you're accumulating technical debt, massive technical debt, as you're just racing forward with writing prompts and deploying it. So, I mean, so as long as you're cognizant as you're racing forward and you're not doing any DevOps, that, hey, this is learning, we're spiking, or this is technical debt, we're eventually going to have to come back. And, just to give you some like real world use cases, we've deployed chatbots that are suddenly, 50 or 100 people are chatting with. And you wake up, let's just say you have some initial success with that chatbot. You're they're bringing in 100 orders a day, measurably, the AI is doing what you want. And then CEO or somebody comes to you and says, hey, it would be great if we do this. So you go into your continuous development integration mode, you extend the prompt, you deploy it, boom, all orders stop. What happens? I mean, what tools do you reach for to understand what changed? Do you roll back? Do you go forward? How could you have prevented that to begin with? And so we were literally in that kind of situation. And I had to step back and apologize to the customer. And basically, it's like, okay, we know better. Went all the way back to basics. And it's like, and this is where we kind of came up with the 8 stages, the Kaizen AI DevOps kind of cycle. So there's test-driven development. We had to develop our own unit test framework. There's regression testing before you deploy. But the biggest mistake I think we're making in DevOps is we see in Salesforce DevOps deployment as the finish line. It's like this heroic effort, QA, you push it, deploy it, and then you go home. And that works in a deterministic environment. Apex running on x86 CPUs will always run the same pretty much every time. I mean, you can sleep at night if you've gone through unit testing and sandbox and deployed it, and that's your finish line. It will run deterministically. AI is not that at all. It is non-deterministic. It's a whole new domain. You deploy an AI model, and talking earlier about context windows, and as these chat threads get longer, there's more variables. LLMs have more variables to use for prediction. So yeah, you're showing the slide here. Once you deploy it around stage 5, that's when the real excitement begins. So what we've done is we've kind of wired step 1 and 7 together. You write these unit tests, and preemptively, those also serve as your regression testing. Do we launch or not? So it's green, red light. You just want a Christmas tree of all green lights before we deploy. And then every night we actually just rerun the regression test, but we also look at the chat logs, the dialogues that are actual talking to customers. And we have a GPT prompt that says, hey, act as a DevOps um, chat analysis. Is this particular discussion with a customer aligned with the objectives of this model? So it's taken it to the next level, because for every token you're spending on the actual customer engagement, you're probably spending 2, one preemptively on the tests and one preemptively on the continuous. So, a lot of your GPT execution is wrapping and enforcing this quality. And then, so yeah, retrospectives kind of disinherited from every other agile methodology, and that we just formalize sitting down, and usually it's the next day. Once you've deployed, it's like, fingers crossed, what have we done? And then you look at the dialogues, you look at it, and you get a sense of what customers adopted it, who hasn't. And okay, what do we do going forward? And a lot of sprint-based tools, whatever we're using today, I think still works. Capato's gear sets, GitHub. I don't see a lot of that process going anywhere. But where we're looking, it very specifically is AI, and GPT is a non-deterministic software model, and it has its own unique DevOps requirements.
I'll take it short. That on the traditional DevOps side of things, I think that there's a big opportunity to figure out how AI starts to play into that, right? How do we make the things that we do badly today more efficient, right? Like how does AI start to fold in with, automatically reviewing pull requests out of GitHub, right? And being able to say, hey, this one, while it passes all the tests, it has these 3 problems because of our own internal standards. Or helping people build manifests automatically based on analyzing the data that it sees in the target and destination orgs, things like that. I think there's a lot of greenfield to explore around what that could potentially look like.
Yeah, so I think there's really kind of 2 main AI injection points in this cycle, right? Sort of, well, 1 and 2, I guess, and then 7 as well, right? When you talk about monitoring, not just using AI to help you develop either other AI applications or just more general Salesforce applications. But then, when you're using AI and writing prompts and getting a response, is also making sure that you're monitoring that on an ongoing basis. Because I think, like you said, Mike, it's great way to phrase it. It's non-deterministic, right? You put inputs into an Apex function, you can pretty much guarantee what the outputs are going to be, or you're just going to get an error that gets raised, and then you can, deal with that then. Catch that error and deal with it and be alerted to it. If your AI is hallucinating or giving, the wrong responses to a customer, that's not necessarily, you're not going to get like an error message in your inbox to say, hey, this thing screwed up, right? And so I'm curious what you think, from just a traditional, um, uh, like the life cycle, I understand. But then, like you said, a lot of people look at deployment as the finish line, right? And then you're on to the next sprint, you're on to the next story, you're moving on, unless there's an escalation or something that comes to your inbox. Um, does this, potentially take a new role on the team when we talk about just our, development life cycle to either be writing, does it change how we think about writing tests? Who writes the tests? Who's doing the monitoring? Like, what's your perspective on sort of maybe how even this changes our teams and product development and just more general Salesforce development?
Yeah, I think you're on to something. It absolutely will be new roles. Um, and historically, if you look back at Ruby on Rails, Model View Controller, 3-stack, I mean, Salesforce's MVC, then roles evolved around those. You have front-end developer, you have back-end developer, you have product manager, you have QA. And we'll see something similar here. I think on the front end, because so much of this like section 2 development is NLP, natural language processing or programming. What we do today as a business analyst writes up a lot of requirements and kind of throws it over the fence for implementation. AI actually likes what a BA wrote as the source code. And so I think we're going to see a lot more BA engagement. We're going to see a lot more natural language. I'm coaching some people today who they think in terms of if statements, conditional branching. I mean, they're not coders, they're not programmers, but they will tell you if this happens, I would like, this CPQ functionality or this bundle happen. And so I tell them, hey, that's great. Write that up for me. Write out all the edge cases you can think of in a Word doc or an email. And then that becomes the source code. So, and then as we go around the cycle where you're talking about, new roles on. So yeah, when you get into like 6 and 7 onboarding and enablement, um, I think there's that need, there's that function during the release process to say, hey, we're in work week 49. We want to stabilize before Christmas. Here's some new functionality. Here's what we've done to test it. So there's that kind of communicator role, that PM kind of shifts. But they're speaking in terms of AI. And like I said, a lot of AI is going to be pushing information at them. And, to a degree, these conversational co-pilots, chat-based, have Easter eggs in them. You don't really know the capability of a enterprise chatbot till you start engaging with it. So I think there's a role to kind of either do inline help or train people. But this monitoring alignment, I mean, in Salesforce, we don't do a lot of ops. If you really think about it, the term DevOps started in this developers and QA were two silos. And when the website went down, you didn't know who to blame. And so they combined the role and the DevOps, and people wearing a DevOps hat actually have some say into, you know, these were the number of Lambda functions or the number of containers that we can deploy. I mean, they have some say operationally. You don't necessarily have that in Salesforce. You deploy it in Salesforce, will take care of the compilation of your code, the uptime of it. So with AI, that kind of changes because, like I said, this is an operating system. It is a literal ops role. I mean, you deploy it, and we've talked about that's not the finish line, but then you're full on like we need to invent new dashboards. We need to invent new ways of sampling every single chat. I mean, you can't sample 1,000 chats. I mean, you can't analyze 1,000 chats, but you can sample them. And so, these people are they're in the statistics to some degree, I think, in this role. Like, what's the P95 alignment on the shopping cart bot? You want to be able to ask these questions. So yeah, absolutely. These are new roles, or they're just a reframing of existing roles.
Sorry, I think that kind of preempts maybe our last question here, which is, going into 2025 and beyond, and maybe even the rest of 2024, as fast as a lot of this is moving. What impact can we expect on the role of architects and developers? I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit. I think in some teams, you're talking about big teams, large projects, these could be dedicated roles. I think in majority of projects, where, lots of people are wearing different hats, there's going to potentially be some new expectations of folks who are working on projects that have AI embedded. Obviously, we know that there's code generation functions that are going to continue getting better and better and better. You're talking about BAs being more important in really natural language being the source code. What do you think, as a Salesforce architect or a Salesforce developer, sort of in the environment that we're in right now, how should I be thinking about that role, in my role, going into the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, if you're setting a really high bar for an architect these days, it's a pretty tough role because it's a balance of people skills. We're in the middle of cultural change. There's the dynamic of politics and people, and there, you just got to be honest on that dimension. There are people who, if you even mention AI, they have job security issues. I'm just putting these out on the table because which role is responsible for addressing that? That's going to land on project sponsor and/or architect. Technically, I think the fundamental responsibilities for an architect, one, are just capabilities. Know the depth of capabilities of OpenAI or Claude or whatever you're doing, and without making any decisions as to when and where you would use those, but you have an obligation to really embrace the capabilities of AI fundamentally. Attending this kind of conference and talking about it, I think, is part of that. It's also part of critical thinking. Architects will sit in a room with completely contrasting, disparate ideas going on. And, they have to err on the side, I think, of being a generalist over a specialist. The other important thing, we talked about technical debt. I think the mental model of an architect needs to understand when, okay, we're doing a very low complexity record trigger flow that's going to summarize an account. And there are people in the wing saying, well, no, actually the requirement's more ambitious than that. And so you need to be kind of that person that's saying, let's accept a quick win here in the sprint. We're actually going to learn more than just the technology. We're going to go through the DevOps cycle. And, let's come back to that more ambitious requirement later. So, I mean, it's a very tough role. In any sort of major technological change, the architects, the system designers. But I also think it's where we're going to have the greatest shortfall of resources. We're just not going to, there's going to be so many companies that will plateau. I mean, they'll have every intent to move forward on AI, but there just won't be enough people that can move the iceberg, or steer the ship, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's a very tough role, but I also think it's probably the most exciting role going forward over the next 5 to 10 years.
Only thing I'd add on to that is the prompt engineering piece, right? Like if you're involved in a project that's going to involve AI, you need to have some chops around prompt engineering and have some experience around understanding how to build really good prompts to get the outputs that you are looking for. So I would certainly invest some time in whichever one of the models you pick, in spending some time working through different examples of how to write prompts and what makes good prompts, and as well as getting into the specifics of the various features that model or that software has.
Yeah, so I think that's all really good feedback, and I think we really focused that on architects. What do you guys think about from a developer perspective, right? I mean, I think rightly so. With the even in the last year, I mean, the code generation capabilities of the models that I've worked with have gotten better. Obviously, Salesforce is releasing a lot of those capabilities, Copilot and such. There's a lot of focus on developer productivity. It's called productivity right now. What does that become in the next few years, and how does that change the role of a developer?
Yeah, that's a great question. From personal experience, what we're pushing on these iDialogue models is very, very dependent on a flow developer. That's a very necessary, critical skill set. And we've done a little bit of divide and conquer. AI on the front end understands the intent, the wants, and the needs of the user. it crafts them in kind of a virtual representation, could be JSON, CSV, but then it passes it to what you could call the controller layer. And because we're dealing with a relational database on the back end, that flow developer kind of sits in between relational data and things that are more traditional and not likely to change. And then you have AI that's moving exceptionally fast. I mean, it can it can generate a quote with 10 line items with just a few natural language prompts. But in the end, that flow developer kind of sits in between it. And also on initialization. So we're really, really on the security privacy front. We have a lot of accumulated knowledge on initialization flows. So when a chatbot wakes up, it's actually a flow that's running, is grabbing the accounts, grabbing the case, it knows the contact, it knows the entitlements. And so you need a flow developer to develop what we call it, well, it's the system prompt in generalized terms, but we also call it the comprehensive snapshot. And so you're bringing the customer relationship into a cohesive system prompt or snapshot that at that point, once you're engaging with that aggregate data, it's a true human. I mean, you would be hard pressed to differentiate if you were talking with a human or AI. But the flow developer is making that happen on the back end.
Even for Apex developers, I think it's going to be a need to learn to use AI to augment what you're doing, right? To speed things up for one, but to get, I think there's a test. Everybody hates to write Apex tests, right? They're, from a DevOps perspective, that's really one of the ops tools that we have in the quiver, the ops tool that we have in the quiver to know, hopefully, if things are running or not. And I've yet to see an org with a really, really well done, structure of Apex tests where they run it and they go, yep, high confidence, the org works. So being able to use AI to fill gaps where things are not being done up to the level as a developer you need to do them, but you don't have the time or the capacity to do them, I think is going to be able to set you apart from other folks that are trying to do the same work.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think my main takeaway from that whole part of the conversation is learn prompt engineering. Doesn't matter what your role is. It doesn't matter sort of what you're doing. Prompt engineering will become a critical skill you have to play. Okay, so we are just about at time. I don't see any questions in the chat. You have any? We still have just a couple minutes. Please feel free to type those in. In the meantime, Molly, do you want to go to the next slide? I did want to give you a moment, Mike, to talk about just sort of what you're doing at iDialogue right now. I know you mentioned a few of the things that you all are working on and that you have worked on as part of your journey in learning AI. But what are you excited about right now that you guys are working on?
Yeah, you shared a slide on the AI DevOps lifecycle, and thank you very much for sharing that. That's been kind of that represents lessons learned over the last couple years, that just the need to formalize that. The next thing I'm pretty excited about is once we attain this capability to rapidly serialize and move models to and from different orgs, is we're going to launch an app store. It's really frustrating from our customers today. I'll show them a demo of an AI compliance on a grant, nonprofit grant, or a document. It's like, wow, this is great. Let's deploy it. And, for a year or so, I've been saying, well, now we got to manually go rebuild it because we don't really have these deployment capabilities. So now that we have those capabilities, we can pre-build a resume parser that extracts out work history. We can pre-build AI contract analysis. So all these different models we're going to put on an app store. So I'm really excited about that because I want to get to that one-click capability where people can just pull these down and start using a model same day.
Very cool. So we are at time, but we got one question. Thank you, Michael. How do you reply when someone asks about AI in a sales context? So for example, I'm a prospective client. I've got Salesforce. I know I need to prep for AI. Where do I start?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult because 100% of executives know they need to take some initiative in a proof of concept or a pilot. And I initially started with just being an active listener. You know, what are your objectives? What do you want to achieve? And what I've since learned is that, you know, many of these things they're seeing, like ChatGPT, these are the most complex projects. These are the ones that are most likely to fail if that's your first POC project. So I'm getting better at this, and you know, mostly it's content and sharing, but in visualization documents that show stepping stones. I mean, these are immediate gratification AI projects, and so I kind of see them as like a menu. You walk into a restaurant, and I can recommend these 5 things. I know you'll like one of these things from a sales perspective, but um, yeah, it can be difficult when people are seeing more ambitious AI projects and saying, I want that, but you know, maybe it's too soon for it. It's, you know, that's what I'm seeing in the sales cycle.
I think Matt, you can maybe even talk about how we got started because we had the same question at one time, right?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, why do they want to use this, right? Do they have a specific, did they hear the buzzword and they think they need to be at the bleeding edge of things? Or have they, you know, really thoughtfully considered the options and they have some use cases they want to try it on? And I think there's flavor there to consider. But certainly I'd echo, like, find a simple use case, right? As with anything, like, you don't want to walk into a project with a customer and try to rewrite their entire sales support and backend process all at once, right? It's not going to work. You got to find something discrete, something that is, you know, painful enough where they're willing to invest some money to solve that problem, and where AI is a good fit, right? And I try to steer the customer to find a use case like that, and then make that the inflection point to prove that it's valuable to them. And then from there, you can move on to harder stuff.
Yeah, and I do think that it's the main point there is helping to elicit use cases, right, with them. And if you think about like what AI is good at, generative AI specifically, it's good at generating text, right? So when you think about use cases in a business that are super text driven or that are super manual, or people are writing things, especially if it's a lot of text, or analyzing certain text to create other text, those are going to be good potential use cases for AI, right? And so when I'm going into a business and trying to figure out, okay, like where can AI really make a difference, especially with sort of the simple generative use cases that we've talked about today, you know, those are the main things that I'm looking for initially. And when you find wins there, certainly people start to get it, right? And they can start bringing more use cases to you versus you having to sort of lead the horse to. But it's a great question. Thanks for asking it.
Yeah,
We are over time just a little bit, but Mike, really appreciate your time. Matt, yours as well. Great insights and conversation.
Nick, thank you very much. Yeah, my
Yeah,
pleasure.
absolutely. And for those of you who have not heard of iDialogue, check out iDialogue on the App Exchange. And we will post this recording for everyone that attended. Thank you for attending live, and we'll see you next time.